He called me a useless burden on a Tuesday morning. Threw my sewing bag, the one I've carried for 31 years, the one my mother gave me, straight into the trash can by the front door. Didn't look at me when he did it. Like discarding me was something so routine it didn't even deserve eye contact. And I stood there in my daughter's kitchen in my old house dress, and I thought, Marcus, sweetheart, you have absolutely no idea whose house you're standing in. Let me tell you who I am before I tell you what happened, because that context is going to matter enormously in about 15 minutes. My name is Dorothy Elaine Marsh. I am 67 years old. I have one daughter, Claire, 34, brilliant, the kind of woman who laughs with her whole body and cries at commercials and deserved someone who looked at her the way she deserved to be looked at. She did not marry that person. She married Marcus. Marcus was 36, regional director of acquisitions at a commercial real estate firm, which is a very long title that basically means he evaluated properties and decided whether his company should buy them. He was good at his job. He knew it. He made sure everyone in a 10-foot radius also knew it, at all times, without exception. Marcus had a handshake that lasted slightly too long. Marcus had opinions about wine that he shared whether or not anyone had asked. Marcus called me Dorothy in a tone that technically used my name, but somehow managed to make it feel like an insult. The red flags with Marcus. You guys, the red flags. He introduced Claire at parties as my wife. She works in nonprofit. The pause before nonprofit doing a lot of heavy lifting, implying that real work had a salary that mattered. Claire ran a literacy nonprofit that served 4,000 children annually. Marcus ran his mouth. But sure, he had a specific phrase he used when he wanted to end a conversation he was losing or dismiss something he didn't want to deal with. Let's be realistic here, said with a small smile. Said like he was the only person in the room who had ever encountered reality before. When Claire told him I'd be moving in temporarily, I'd sold my house. The new place wasn't ready for 8 weeks, Marcus said, standing right in front of me. Let's be realistic here, Claire. Your mother is going to need a lot of looking after. I was standing 4 feet away. I had just driven 6 hours. I smiled and said nothing. I am very good at saying nothing. I have had a lot of practice. What Marcus understood about me: retired, widowed, lived simply, wore house dresses, brought homemade jam, did the dishes without being asked, was, in his specific and confident assessment, a woman whose entire life had been small and domestic and entirely unremarkable. What Marcus did not know about me, anything that actually mattered. I had founded MARSH Properties in 1987 with $12,000, a second mortgage, and the absolute certainty that commercial real estate in this city was about to change dramatically. I had been correct. Over the next 30 years, my company had acquired, developed, and managed 34 properties across the metro area. I had taken MARSH Properties public in 2003, retained 61% of shares, and quietly stepped back from day-to-day operations in 2019, when my husband got sick and I decided that being with him mattered more than any quarterly report. I wore house dresses because I found them comfortable. I brought homemade jam because I genuinely liked making it. I did the dishes because I was raised to help in a home that fed you. None of this made me small. Marcus had no way of knowing any of this because Marcus had never asked me a single question about my life that wasn't rhetorical. In 4 years of marriage to my daughter, Marcus had never once sat down and said, Dorothy, tell me about yourself. His loss, very much his loss. The Tuesday it all collapsed started at 8:14 a.m. I was at the kitchen table with my sewing. A quilt I'd been making for Claire's birthday, hand-stitched. A pattern her grandmother had taught me. And Marcus came downstairs in his work suit, poured his coffee, and stood at the counter going through his phone. He didn't say good morning. He hadn't said good morning to me once in the 6 weeks I'd been there. Dorothy, still looking at his phone. I need $40. I looked up. I'm sorry, $40. Now he looked at me. The specific look of a man who found the need to repeat himself deeply irritating. For the grocery delivery, Claire's card is having issues and mine is maxed from the work trip. I need $40. I want you to note, this man was a regional director of acquisitions. This man had, at dinner 3 nights before, described a $2.3 million property evaluation he'd been leading. This man was asking his mother-in-law for $40 and doing it with the energy of someone collecting a debt. I don't have $40 on me, I said, which was true. I hadn't carried cash since 2020. Marcus put his coffee cup down, and something in him, some valve, some seal that had been holding back for years of carefully managed contempt, just opened. You know what, Dorothy? Let's be realistic here, he said it slowly, deliberately. You live in my house. You eat my food. Claire waits on you constantly. You contribute nothing. You sit at that table with your little sewing project, and you are, genuinely, a burden, a useless one. I didn't move. And this, he crossed to the front door, picked up my sewing bag, my mother's bag, the brown leather one with the brass clasp, and dropped it in the trash can. This clutter is everywhere. I'm tired of looking at it. He picked up his coffee, picked up his keys. I'll be home at 7, he said to the room, and left. I sat at that table for a long time. Then I reached into the trash can, took out my mother's sewing bag, brought it upstairs, and made a phone call. The first of several. The person I called was my assistant of 19 years, a woman named Phyllis who had once, without blinking, managed a hostile takeover attempt while simultaneously planning my husband's retirement party. Phyllis was unflappable in a way that approached the supernatural. Phyllis, I said, I need to know if the Hartwell Group deal is still scheduled for Thursday. It is, she said. Boardroom's confirmed. The full acquisition committee will be there, including, she paused, Dorothy, the liaison from the acquiring firm. Do you know who they sent? I did not know. Phyllis told me. I sat down on the edge of the guest bed in my daughter's house and started laughing. The real kind of laughing, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and a little unhinged. Marcus's firm, Marcus's company, the regional acquisitions team. Marcus was the liaison. You guys, I did not plan this. I want to be very clear that the universe did this one entirely on its own. My company, MARSH Properties, was selling a portfolio of 3 downtown buildings to Marcus's firm. The deal had been in negotiation for 4 months. Marcus had been working on this acquisition for his company for weeks. The building where the closing meeting was scheduled? The Hartwell, named for my late husband, Richard Hartwell Marsh. 14 floors, 340,000 square feet. The name Marsh in 18-inch bronze letters above the lobby entrance. Marcus had been driving past that building for years. He had evaluated it. He had worked on acquiring it. He had, in the file on his desk right now, paperwork with my name on it. And somehow, in 4 years of marriage to my daughter, he had never connected Dorothy Marsh to Marsh Properties, because he had never asked. I called Claire next. Claire, who had known about my business her entire life and had said nothing to Marcus because, her words, when she called me crying that night after I told her what had happened with the sewing bag. Mom, I kept waiting for him to ask. I kept thinking he'd eventually be curious about who you were. He never was. She cried for a long time. I let her. Then I said, Claire, I need you to trust me for 48 hours. She said, Mom, what are you going to do? I'm going to go to a meeting, I said. Let's be realistic here. I thought, hanging up the phone. Let's. Thursday, 10 a.m. I wore my good suit. Charcoal gray, Italian wool. The one I'd had made in 2018 for the groundbreaking of the Hartwell building. I wore my mother's pearl earrings. I carried my briefcase, actual leather, monogrammed, not the sewing bag Marcus had put in the trash. I called a car, not a rideshare. The company car, the one with the Marsh Properties logo on the door. Phyllis met me in the lobby. They're all here, she said, handing me my folder. 8 people from their acquisition committee. Their CEO flew in from Chicago. And she smiled in the way Phyllis smiled when she was enjoying something enormously. Your son-in-law arrived 20 minutes ago. He's been making conversation in the hallway. He seems very confident. He usually does, I said. We took the elevator to the 12th floor. The boardroom at the Hartwell had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table that seated 20, and my name on the wall, Marsh Properties, in the same brass as the lobby, behind the head chair. I walked in last. 8 people from the acquisition committee. Their CEO, a man named Gerald I'd spoken with by phone 4 times. 2 of my own executives, Phyllis and Marcus, sitting mid-table, tie straight, the easy, relaxed posture of a man who expected to be the most important person in the room and had dressed accordingly. He was looking at his phone when I walked in. He looked up, and I watched it happen in real time. The exact sequence of recognition, confusion, and then a specific kind of horror that started in his eyes and moved outward to the rest of his face like a slow tide. Dorothy from the kitchen. Dorothy and the sewing bag. Dorothy, Marsh. The CEO, Gerald, stood up immediately. Dorothy, wonderful to finally meet in person. He shook my hand with both of his. Genuine warmth. 4 months of phone calls will do that. The other executives stood. The committee members stood. Phyllis had already taken her seat. Everyone was standing. Marcus was still sitting. I looked at him across the table. I said, very pleasantly, very calmly, in the same tone I had used when I said I don't have $40 on me. Marcus, thank you for being here. Please take your seat at the end of the table, the seat furthest from mine, the seat that, in the specific geometry of that room, meant something and everyone present understood what it meant. Marcus sat at the end of the table. I set my briefcase down and I opened the meeting. The next 2 hours were the most professionally satisfying of my career, and my career has had some extraordinary moments. The acquisition committee was prepared. My team was immaculate. The numbers were clean. Gerald and I had a genuine rapport that filled the room with the specific, comfortable energy of a deal that is going to close well. Marcus said almost nothing for 2 hours. Every time he started to speak, and he tried, twice, to reassert himself with the confident acquisitions man voice, Gerald would look to me for confirmation, and I would answer, and the conversation would move on. The second time Marcus tried to interject, one of his own committee members, a woman named Sandra who had clearly dealt with Marcus before, said, without looking up from her folder, "Let's let Dorothy finish, Marcus. Let's be realistic here," I thought. Let's. At 12:15, we broke for lunch. The committee filtered out toward the dining room. Phyllis collected the folders, and Marcus and I were briefly, for the first time, alone in that boardroom. He stood at the window, city below, my name on the wall behind him. He said, not turning around, "Why didn't you tell me?" "You never asked," I said. "Claire never. Claire was waiting for you to be curious about her mother," I said. "It's been 4 years, Marcus." He turned around. And the arrogance, all of it, the wine opinions and the realistic hair race and the way he said my name, was just gone. What was underneath it was a much younger, much smaller man who had just understood something enormous and irreversible about himself. He almost looked sorry. For just a moment, he opened his mouth. And then he said, "This changes things. In terms of Claire and I, financially, this obviously." I picked up my briefcase. "Enjoy your lunch, Marcus," I said. There it was. There was the real thing underneath the small thing, right on schedule. Marcus called Claire 4 times before he left the building. I know because she was sitting in my kitchen when I got home. She'd taken the afternoon off, and she showed me the calls, unanswered, lined up on her screen like a confession. The text started at 1:30 p.m. I won't reproduce them exactly, but the general arc was, "This changes everything we need to talk about our future. I've been under a lot of stress lately. Let's be realistic here. What we have is bigger than any misunderstanding. Let's be realistic here. Even in crisis, even in full collapse." The phrase like a reflex, like a tick, like the only tool he had ever really owned. Claire read them all. She didn't respond to any of them. She made us tea, and she sat across from me at her kitchen table, and she said, "I think I've known for a long time. I just didn't have language for it." I said, "You have language for it now." "Yeah," she said. And then, very quietly, "He threw your mother's bag in the trash, Mom." "I know. I saw it when I got home. Before you told me. I saw it in the trash and I stood there for 10 minutes and I didn't know what to do." I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. We stayed like that for a while. This is the moment, by the way, that I cry about now when I think about it. Not the boardroom, not Marcus's face. This, my daughter's hand under mine, and the specific weight of her finally letting herself know what she already knew. The deal closed 4 weeks later. Gerald sent flowers. The Hartwell building now belongs to Marcus's company, which means, in a gorgeous and completely unintentional irony, Marcus now works in a building with my name on it. He drives past Marsh every morning. I hope it's a nice view. Marcus and Claire separated in January. She is in therapy, the real weekly kind. She adopted a dog, a large, ridiculous golden retriever named Biscuit, who knocked over my sewing bag within the first 10 minutes of meeting me, and then looked so guilty about it that I had to sit down from laughing. The sewing bag is fine, by the way. I took it out of the trash, and there wasn't a mark on it. My mother made things to last. I moved into my new place in December. It has a sewing room. I finished Claire's birthday quilt in March, hand-stitched, her grandmother's pattern, The one I'd been working on at that kitchen table on that Tuesday morning at 8:14 a.m. when Marcus looked at me and saw nothing worth knowing. Claire sleeps under it now. What does my life look like? Good. Genuinely good, not the performed kind. I have my company and my quilts and my Thursday calls with Phyllis and Claire and Biscuit on the weekends. I have my mother's sewing bag on the chair by the window and my good Italian suit in the closet and the pearl earrings that I wear when it matters. Am I all the way healed from watching my daughter learn that the person she chose hadn't ever bothered to see either one of us? No. Some mornings I think about the 4 years Marcus sat at our tables and ate our food and accepted our care and never once thought to ask who we were. And that sits in me in a complicated way that doesn't have a clean resolution. But then Biscuit sits on my feet and Claire laughs at something with her whole body, and I think, we're okay. We're really okay. Marcus sent me a connection request on LinkedIn in February. MARSH Properties, founder and chairman. I accepted it. Let's be realistic here. He's going to be seeing that notification for a long time. Some people see an old woman with a sewing bag. I see someone who built the building you're standing in. Learn the difference.